"Don't look at him. Don't breathe too loud. Just serve the water and walk away," the manager hissed, as the rain clawed at the stained glass windows of the Velvet Iris Manhattan's most exclusive Italian hideout. But when Damian Caruso took his seat, stone-faced, untouchable, the shadow king of the city, something in the room shifted. Not because of him, because of the little girl beside him. Leah, 2 years old, sat silent in her high chair, clutching a worn velvet rabbit like it was the last safe thing on earth. She had never spoken. Doctors called it trauma. Damian called it torture. And then Evelyn Harper, a tired-eyed waitress just trying to make rent, stepped to the table with trembling hands and a polite smile she didn't feel. Her wrist brushed the linen. A soft scent, cheap vanilla soap lavender lotion rose into the air. Damian stiffened. Leah lifted her head. For a heartbeat, Evelyn forgot how to breathe. A sharp phantom pain flashed through her body like a memory from a hospital room she'd sworn she'd buried 2 years ago, the day a doctor told her her baby didn't make it. The rabbit slipped from Leah's fingers. She reached for Evelyn's apron strings, desperate shaking, and the sound that followed was small at first. Rusty like a door forced open after years of silence. "Ma." Damian's hand moved toward his jacket. Leah's voice cracked louder, breaking the whole restaurant in half. "Mama, mama, up." In that instant, the most dangerous man in New York didn't look like a boss. He looked like a father realizing his empire was built on a lie. Evelyn didn't understand why her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had served politicians who smiled like sharks. Men with mistresses young enough to be their daughters, couples who argued in whispers sharp enough to draw blood. But this was different. The little girl's fingers were tangled in her apron strings now, knuckles white, as if letting go would mean falling into something dark and endless. "Sweetheart," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking without permission. She wasn't talking as a waitress anymore. She was talking like someone who knew how fear felt in a child's chest. Damian Caruso rose slowly from his chair. The room seemed to shrink around him. "Leah," he said quietly, panic leaking through the iron in his tone. "Look at me." But Leah wouldn't. Her eyes stayed locked on Evelyn's face, those green eyes flecked with gold that mirrored something buried deep inside the child, something that had been waiting. Waiting. Evelyn felt it then. Not logic, not reason. Memory. A cold room. White lights. The smell of antiseptic. A doctor who wouldn't meet her eyes. There were complications. The baby didn't survive. Her chest tightened so violently she thought she might scream. Leah lunged forward in the high chair, crying now. Real crying, raw and desperate, and pointed straight at Evelyn like she was calling home. "Mama, mama." The word tore through Evelyn's ribs. I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping back because every instinct screamed that she was standing on the edge of something dangerous. "Sir, I don't know why she's—" Damian grabbed her wrist. Not roughly, not gently, like a man holding the last thread of his sanity. "My daughter has never spoken," he said, his voice low and shaking beneath the fury. "Not once. And tonight she looks at you and says that." The guards at the door shifted. The air turned heavy, poisonous. Leah sobbed harder. "Daddy. No hurt, Mama." A sentence. Damian's grip loosened. For the first time, Evelyn saw it not the monster the city feared, but a man staring at the ruins of a truth he had never questioned. His gaze flicked between the child and the woman who smelled like vanilla and loss. And in that moment, none of them knew it yet, but the lie that had shaped all 3 of their lives had just begun to bleed. The restaurant never officially closed. It was erased. Damian Caruso didn't raise his voice at first. He didn't have to. One sharp motion of his hand, one look from his eyes, and the guards moved like gravity itself. Chairs scraped. Glasses shattered. Patrons were ushered out without explanations, without receipts, without the luxury of curiosity. Within seconds, the Velvet Iris was empty. 2. Empty, its elegance stripped bare and trembling. Evelyn stood frozen behind the bar heart, pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. "You're coming with us." Damien said at last, his tone terrifyingly calm. "This is kidnapping," she whispered, backing away until cold marble pressed into her spine. "I didn't do anything. I don't even know you." Damien lifted Leah into his arms. Instantly, the child quieted her small hands, gripping his collar, yet her eyes never left Evelyn. She reached over Damien's shoulder, fingers stretching, pleading. "Mama," she whimpered again, softer now. Certain. That sound sealed it. Damien turned away, already done debating with himself. "Until I understand why my daughter thinks you are her mother," he said, "you don't leave my sight, The drive was a blur of darkness and rain. A black SUV swallowed Evelyn whole, the city lights dissolving behind tinted glass. She sat between two silent guards, her pulse racing, while Damien stared forward, Leah asleep against his chest. Every time the car hit a bump, the child murmured "ma" in her sleep, each sound another crack in something Damien had built his life on. When the iron gates opened to the estate, Evelyn's stomach dropped. This wasn't a home, it was a fortress. She was locked into a guest room that felt too large, too clean, too final. As the door clicked shut, a memory slammed into her, without warning. White walls, a beeping monitor, a man's voice murmuring, "Take the child away before she wakes." Evelyn slid down to the floor, gasping. The lie she'd lived with for 2 years, the one she'd learned to survive, was no longer quiet. And somewhere down the hall, a little girl slept, calling for a mother she somehow knew had never truly left. The memory didn't knock. It kicked the door in. Evelyn sat on the edge of the massive bed, staring at the ceiling as if it might collapse and end the questions screaming inside her chest. Her hands found the faint scar along her inner arm, old IV marks she had stopped noticing years ago. Zurich. White walls. Cold air that smelled like antiseptic and money. She hadn't thought of it in 2 years. She had been 23. Desperate. Her father's heart failing faster than insurance approvals. A website that promised help. A contract full of words she barely understood, but signed anyway because hope makes liars sound like angels. Genesis Life Clinic. They flew her first class. Treated her gently. Spoke softly. Told her she was doing something beautiful. Carrying a child for a couple who could not. She never met them. Closed contract, clean hands, no names. The night of the birth came too fast. Then darkness. When she woke, her throat was raw from screaming. A doctor stood at the foot of the bed, eyes already done with her. There were complications, he said. The baby didn't survive. He showed her a tiny, still shape, wrapped in white. He did not let her hold her. The door to the guest room opened without warning. Damien Caruso stood there. Jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, exhaustion carved into his face. In his hand was a folder, thick with truth he hadn't asked for until tonight. "You said you lost a child," he said quietly. "Where?" Evelyn swallowed. "Zurich." The word landed between them like a dropped glass. "October 14th, she whispered. 2 years ago. Damien closed his eyes. That was the day his wife had died giving birth. And down the hall, Leah stirred in her sleep. Soft, aching, murmuring "ma," like a memory refusing to stay buried. 2 timelines. 1 child, and a lie so carefully stitched it had fooled everyone. Except the little girl, who had finally found her way home. The truth arrived without drama. No thunder, no shouting, no gun drawn. Just 2 cotton swabs sealed in clear plastic lying on a polished table, like ordinary objects that carried the power to end a life or rebuild one. Damien stood motionless as the technician spoke through the speaker, his voice careful, almost reverent. "We ran the markers 3 times. There's no margin for error. 99.999% probability." Silence swallowed the room. The woman is the biological mother. Evelyn felt her knees give way. She caught herself on the chair, breath shattering in her chest, as if something ancient had finally been named. Not imagined, not wished, proven. Across from her, Damien closed his eyes. He didn't curse, he didn't rage. He simply exhaled, slow, broken, like a man realizing the ground beneath him had never been solid. All those doctors, all those reports, all those nights watching his daughter stare at the walls like a ghost trapped in a beautiful cage. She wasn't sick, Evelyn whispered, tears spilling freely now. She was lost. Damien opened his eyes and looked at her not as a threat, not as a suspect, but as the missing half of a child he had failed to understand. The resemblance was suddenly unbearable, in the curve of Evelyn's mouth, in the way her hands trembled when she fought tears, in Leah's eyes. A child doesn't choose her first word by accident. Down the hall, a soft cry rose as small aching. "Mama?" Evelyn stood before she realized she was moving. In the nursery, Leah reached for her with absolute certainty, crawling into her arms, like she had been waiting her entire life for permission to do so. Her body relaxed instantly, breath evening out, forehead pressed against Evelyn's chest. Damien watched it happen. Not possession, not manipulation, recognition. And in that moment, the most dangerous man in New York understood something no empire had ever taught him. You can steal a child's name. You can steal her past. But you cannot steal where her soul knows it belongs. Dr. Hale didn't arrive like a villain. He arrived like a man who believed paperwork could protect him. Cashmere coat, polished shoes, calm hands that had once held scalpels steady while lying to two souls at once. He smiled when he stepped into the library, the kind of professional smile meant to soften bad news. "Damien," he said lightly, "you sounded concerned." Damien didn't stand. He sat behind the desk, shadows cutting his face in half, a gun resting beside his hand, not raised, not hidden. Honest. Waiting. "We ran a DNA test," Damien said. His voice was quiet enough to be dangerous. "Care to explain why my daughter shares 99.999% of her markers with the waitress from Queens?" The smile slipped. "Just a fraction?" "Selective mutism can create projections," Dr. Hale replied too quickly. "Children attach." "Stop," Evelyn said. She stepped forward from the doorway, no longer shaking, no longer small. In her hands was the velvet rabbit Leah slept with every night. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You told me my baby died," she said. "You wouldn't let me hold her. You took her while I was unconscious." Dr. Hale's eyes darted to Damien. Contracts, clauses, words meant to erase blood. "I did what I was paid to do," he snapped, cracking at last. "Your consent was signed. You were a vessel." "A vessel." Evelyn's voice broke, then hardened into something feral. "I carried her. I felt her kick. I bled for her. And you sold her like a mistake." Damien stood, slowly. The sound of the chair scraping back made Dr. Hale flinch harder than any gunshot could have. "My wife begged you," Damien said. "You let her lie. You let me believe. You erased a mother and handed me a child wrapped in a story." Dr. Hale's composure collapsed. "I saved a legacy," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." Damien leaned in close, voice cold as iron. "You didn't protect a family," he said. "You destroyed one." Behind the glass, Leah stirred in her sleep. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about a debt that could only be paid in truth. The name didn't come out easily. Dr. Hale's mouth opened closed, like a man calculating which truth would kill him slower. His hands trembled now, the confidence bleeding out in thin, frightened breaths. "It wasn't your wife," he said at last, voice barely holding together. "She didn't have the money to erase a birth across borders, to silence a Swiss clinic, to rewrite records." Damien's eyes narrowed. "Then who did?" Dr. Hale swallowed hard. "Your uncle." The word landed like a gunshot. Salvatore Caruso Hale whispered. "He came to me after your wife died. He already knew about the surrogate. He knew the child wasn't hers, and he paid me handsomely to make sure you never found out." Damien staggered back a step as if struck. Salvatore, his father's brother, the man who toasted him at family dinners, the man who had kissed Leah's forehead and called her miracle. Why, Evelyn asked, her voice shaking despite herself. "Why do something like this?" Hale laughed weakly. "Because power doesn't care about innocence." He wiped his brow. "Your family trust shipping construction, everything requires a biological heir by 35. Without Leah, control reverts to Salvatore." Silence roared. He needed you distracted, Hale continued. Softened. Playing father to a miracle child while he skimmed from the empire. And if he ever needed leverage, Hale glanced at Evelyn. He had it. A secret that could destroy you both. Damien closed his eyes. Leah hadn't been a blessing. She had been a pawn. Every sleepless night, every therapy report, every moment, Damien blamed himself for not being enough. All of it engineered. When he opened his eyes again, something ancient and lethal stared back. He knows who she is? Damien said quietly, looking at Evelyn. Which means he knows who you are. Evelyn pulled Leah closer instinctively. What does that mean? It means, Damien replied, voice steady as stone. As long as Salvatore breathes, my daughter's mother is a target. Behind them, Leah stirred, murmuring softly in her sleep. Mama! And Damien understood the final truth with brutal clarity. This was no longer a family secret. It was a war. Evelyn thought the worst part would be the fear. She was wrong. It was the certainty. Damien stood by the window, city lights bleeding through bulletproof glass. His voice stripped of menace and left with something colder calculation sharpened by love. If you walk out that gate, he said quietly, Salvatore won't hesitate. You won't make it an hour. Evelyn tightened her hold on Leah. The child slept against her chest, warm and trusting, unaware that her existence had just redrawn the borders of an empire. So what am I now? Evelyn asked. A hostage. No, Damien replied. He turned eyes dark but steady. Your leverage, and so am I. He crossed the room and placed a small velvet box on the table between them. It landed softly, yet the sound echoed. Evelyn stared at it, dread curling in her stomach. There's one way to make you untouchable, Damien said. One way to make Salvatore hesitate. She opened the box. The ring was heavy, old, the kind of wealth that didn't glitter, it commanded. You want to marry me? Evelyn breathed a hollow laugh, escaping. You kidnapped me. You live in a war. I'm offering you armor, Damien said. As my wife, you're protected by rules even my uncle won't break. Hurt you, and he declares open war on every family that still respects blood. And if I say no, Damien didn't flinch. Then I disappear you somewhere safe. You never see Leah again. The truth of it hurt more than any threat. Evelyn looked down at her daughter, at the tiny hand curled into her shirt, at the quiet certainty of belonging. She lifted her chin. I have conditions? Damien nodded once. I raise her my way. No guns near her. No cages disguised as luxury. Her voice steadied. This is a contract, not love. Something unreadable crossed Damien's face. Agreed. Evelyn slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Across the room, Leah stirred eyes fluttering open. Family, she murmured. And in that moment, Evelyn understood the cruel irony. She had lost her freedom, but she had finally found her child. The warning came too late. The gala lights were still burning champagne, still clinking, when Damien's phone vibrated, once sharp, urgent. His face drained of color as he read the message, and Evelyn felt it before he spoke. A mother always does. He drew us out, Damien said, already moving. Salvatore hit the house. The drive back was chaos, sirens, swallowed by the roar of the engine rain streaking the windshield, like the city itself was bleeding. Evelyn's hands were locked together, a single name repeating in her head, like prayer and curse. Leah. 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 They didn't need to search the estate. The sound found them first. A child's scream, thin, terrified, tearing through stone and steel. They followed it up the stairs, past the nursery, where the crib lay overturned, and out onto the roof, where the wind howled like a witness. Salvatore stood at the edge, his silver hair whipped wild, one hand gripping Leah by the back of her nightgown. 50 feet below, the ocean waited. Choose, Salvatore sneered, the Empire or the girl. Damien stepped forward, empty hands raised. He dropped his gun without hesitation. Let her go, he said, voice steady even as his hands shook. I'll jump. Salvatore smiled and opened his fingers. Time broke. Evelyn didn't scream. She moved. She threw herself across the slick stone, sliding, reaching her body, slamming into the railing as her hand closed around Leah's ankle. Pain exploded through her shoulder, but she held on muscles, screaming, breath ripping from her lungs. "I've got you," she cried into the storm. "Mama's got you." A shot rang out. Salvatore fell backward, shock frozen on his face, as he disappeared into the dark. Damien hauled them both back onto the roof, collapsing around them, arms locked tight like he could stitch the world together by force alone. Leah sobbed against Evelyn's chest, small hands clutching her dress. Then softly, so softly it almost vanished in the wind, she whispered her third word, family. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Evelyn knew with bone-deep certainty they had won. 6 months later, the Moretti estate no longer felt like a fortress. Sunlight poured through open windows where heavy curtains once kept the world out. The air smelled like flowers instead of gun oil. Laughter, real, unguarded laughter, echoed through halls that had known only silence and orders. In the garden, Evelyn stood in white, her fingers trembling not with fear, but with disbelief. Damien waited for her at the altar, the sharp edges of the man he once was, softened by something stronger than power. Devotion. Beside them, Leah, now a talkative 3-year-old, scattered flower petals with clumsy joy, stopping every few steps to look back and make sure both her parents were still there. They were, always. When Damien spoke his vows, his voice didn't shake from danger anymore, but from gratitude. For the woman who had crossed fire for their child. For the child who had broken a curse with one word. Mama. Leah ran into Evelyn's arms, mid-ceremony, giggling, and the guests laughed through tears. No empire had ever mattered as much as this moment. No lie had survived it. As the gates closed behind them that afternoon, they didn't shut the world out. They protected what was finally real. This story reminds us of something the world often forgets. Family is not built by power, money, or blood alone, but by presence, sacrifice, and love that refuses to let go. Truth has a way of finding its voice, even when silenced for years. And nothing is more powerful than a parent fighting for their child. If this story touched something in you, ask yourself, who are you willing to stand up for, no matter the cost? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if it moved you. And don't forget to subscribe because the next story might be the one you didn't know you needed today.